Hello there, welcome to Twice. In this video, I'd like to share a story about a group of people where psychopathy or sociopathy or whatever it was taken to the extreme. And this is a chapter or a story from a book. I believe it was The Wisdom of Psychopaths, because I had this book and scanned some pages. That was the only book about psychopathy that I really had as a book and not as a digital book or an ebook. And let's begin, and you'll get the idea about the psychopathic mindset and how they can work, and how similar psychopathic men and women also are in their cruelty and also their self-serving needs, and also their obsession a little bit also with food maybe, and the survival of the fittest even idea, which is very much popular in certain groups of people, especially those that believe that genes are everything, and unfortunately many of them also see psychopathy as something superior, when in fact, when you think about it and when you see this story, you'll see that it's actually killing off its own tribe. And this is a story from Uganda, and it's not meant to say that in Uganda people can become like this. Psychopathy does not discriminate. It's just that this story comes from Uganda. And let's read it. The Mountain People, a Wilding Culture. Between 1964 and 1967, anthropologist Colin Turnbull lived among the people of Uganda known as the Ik or the Ike, an unfortunate people expelled by an uncaring government from their traditional hunting lands to extremely barren mountainous areas. In 1972, Turnbull published a haunting book about his experiences that left no doubt that the whole society can embrace wilding as a way of life. When Turnbull first came to the Ik, he met Otto, a sprinkly, barefoot old man with a sweet smile who helped guide Turnbull to remote Ik villages. Otto warned Turnbull right away that everyone would ask for food. Although many would indeed be hungry, he said, most could fend for themselves, and their pleas should not be trusted. Turnbull, Otto stressed, should on no account give them anything. But before he left that day, Otto mentioned that his own wife was severely ill and desperately needed food and medicine. On reaching his village, Otto told Turnbull his wife was too sick to come out. Later, Turnbull heard exchanges between Otto and his sick wife and moans of her suffering. The moans were retching, and when Otto pleaded for help, Turnbull gave him food and some aspirin. Some weeks later, Otto had stepped up his request for food and medicine, saying his wife was getting sicker. Turnbull was now seriously concerned, urging Otto to get her to a hospital. Otto refused, saying she wasn't that sick. Shortly thereafter, Otto's brother-in-law came to Turnbull and told him that Otto was selling the medicine that Turnbull had been giving him for his wife. Turnbull, not terribly surprised, said that that was too bad for his wife. The brother-in-law, enjoying the joke enormously, finally explained that Otto's wife had been dead for weeks and that Otto had buried her inside the compound so you wouldn't know. No wonder Otto had not wanted his wife to go to the hospital, Turnbull thought to himself. She was worth far more to him dead than alive. Startling to Turnbull was not only the immense glee the brother-in-law seemed to take in the joke inflicted on his dying sister, but the utter lack of embarrassment Autumn showed when confronted with his lie. Autumn shrugged it off, knowing no remorse whatsoever, saying he had simply forgotten to tell Turnbull that his little business enterprise may have led to his wife's death was the last thing on Autumn's mind. This was one of the first of many events that made Turnbull wonder whether there was any limit to what an Ike would do to get food and money. Some time later, Turnbull came across Lomeja, an Ike man he had met much earlier. Lomeja had been shot during an attack by neighboring tribesmen and was lying in a pool of his own blood, apparently dying from 2 bullet wounds in the stomach. Still alive and conscious, Lomeja looked up at Turnbull and asked for some tea. Shaken, Turnbull returned to his Land Rover and filled a big new yellow enamel mug. When he returned, Lomeja's wife was bending over her husband. She was trying to fold him up in the dead position, although he was not yet dead, and started shrieking at Turnbull to leave Lomeja alone because he was already dead. Lomeja found the strength to resist his wife's premature efforts to bury him and was trying to push her aside. Turnbull managed to get the cup of tea to Lomeja, who was still strong enough to reach out for it and sip it. Suddenly Turnbull heard a loud giggle and saw Lomeja's sister Kimat. Attracted by all the yelling, she had seen that lovely new bright yellow enamel mug of hot sweet tea, had snatched it from her brother's face and made off with it, proud and joyful. She not only had the tea, she also had the mug. She drank as she ran, laughing and delighted at herself. Turnbull came to describe the Ike as the loveless people. Each Ike valued only his or her own survival and regarded everyone else as a competitor for food. Ike life had become a grim process of trying to find enough food to stay alive each day. The hunt consumed all of their resources, leaving virtually no reserve for feelings of any kind, nor for any moral scruples that might interfere with filling their stomachs. As Margaret Mead wrote, the Ike had become a people who have become monstrous beyond belief. Scientist Ashley Montego wrote that the Ike are a people who are dying because they have abandoned their own humanity. Ike families elevated wilding to a high art. Turnbull met Ajapa, a young girl of perhaps 6, who was so malnourished that her stomach was grossly distended and her legs and arms spindly. Her parents had decided she had become a liability and threw her out of their hut because she was too weak now to go out on long scavenging ventures as did the other children. She would wander as far as her strength would allow, pick up scraps and bones or half-eaten berries, and then come back to her parents' place, waiting to be brought back in. Days later, her parents, tiring of her crying, finally brought her in and promised to feed her. Ajapa was happy and stopped crying. The parents went out and closed the assack behind them so tight that the weak Ajapa could never have moved if she had tried. Ajapa waited for them to come back with the food they had promised, but they did not return until a whole week had passed, when they knew Ajapa would be dead. Ajapa's parents took her rotting remains, Turnbull writes, and threw them out as one does the riper garbage a good distance away. There was no burial and no tears. So this is a story about a society that had become monstrous beyond belief. highly psychopathic, highly sociopathic, perhaps, and also uh, everyone fending for themselves to the extent that even children were malnourished, killed, or left for dead. So hopefully it will help those interested to understand psychopathy a little bit better, and the mind of the psychopath and what they are basically capable of, and how their world view looks like, even though they can seem so charming, so nice, and they always blame somebody else for um, doing what they themselves do. Like in the case of the story of the first man who's that told this anthropologist Turnbull that everyone else wanted food from him, but they could fend for themselves, but he needed medicine and food for his sick wife, while he killed or let his wife die so that he could make a business of selling medicine and so on. So this is the mindset of the psychopath, and we see this extremes example, of course, in our society also, where parents are malnourishing their children, and they put them in cages and lock them up, and they don't give them food, just torture them from morning to evening. And the same thing happens in this torture facilities like Guantanamo Bay. This is also an expression of the same psychopathy, even though it is at a very high societal level, and most people would say that it's okay, but in fact they are actually um, encouraging, the psychopath and the psychopathy to reinforce itself as something that should exist in our more modern and so-called civilized society. And that's all for this time about psychopathy. Thank you for listening.